The afternoon sun blazed down on Sterling Automotive's luxury service center, casting long shadows across the pristine showroom floor. Marcus Thompson wiped the perspiration from his forehead with the back of his weathered hand, the same hand that had once calibrated rocket engines destined for Mars. At 58, those hands were as steady as they'd ever been, bearing the honest calluses of a man who'd spent his life building things that mattered. The other mechanics at Sterling's didn't know about Marcus's past, and he preferred it that way. After 30 years of designing propulsion systems for NASA's most ambitious missions, he'd grown tired of the politics, the endless meetings, the pressure to justify every decision to bureaucrats who'd never held a wrench. Here in this garage, problems were simple, something was broken, and you fixed it. Marcus had been working at Sterling's for 3 months now, ever since he'd decided to take early retirement and find some peace. The pay was a fraction of what he'd made as a senior aerospace engineer, but money had never been the point. He had enough saved to last several lifetimes. What he needed was the satisfaction of working with his hands again, of solving problems without committees and budgets getting in the way. The familiar rumble of a flatbed truck interrupted his thoughts. Marcus looked up to see a sleek red Ferrari 48 being carefully unloaded, its pristine paint job gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Even after decades of working with the most advanced machines humanity had ever built, he still appreciated beautiful engineering when he saw it. The car's owner emerged from a black Mercedes S-Class, his Italian leather shoes clicking against the polished concrete floor with the confidence of a man who'd never been denied anything. Richard Sterling, Marcus recognized him from the business magazines, was everything the rumors suggested: impeccably dressed, perfectly groomed, and radiating the kind of arrogance that came from inherited wealth and unchecked privilege. Sterling was already barking orders into his gold-plated phone, discussing some merger worth hundreds of millions of dollars. His voice carried across the service bay loud enough for everyone to hear that he was very important and very busy. "Excuse me." Sterling snapped his fingers in Marcus's direction without bothering to look up from his call. "I need to speak with your head mechanic immediately. This isn't a job for just anybody." Marcus set down the diagnostic scanner he'd been using on another vehicle and walked over calmly. "I can help you with that, sir. What seems to be the problem with your Ferrari?" Sterling finally glanced over, his cold blue eyes immediately cataloging and dismissing everything about Marcus. The worn coveralls with Marcus stitched above the breast pocket, the oil-stained hands, the graying temples, the calm dignity that Sterling mistook for simple-mindedness. "Look," Sterling said with barely concealed impatience, "I'm sure you mean well, but this is a $500,000 piece of precision Italian engineering. I need someone with actual qualifications, not someone who, well, you know." The insult hung in the air, unfinished but crystal clear. Marcus had heard variations of it his entire life, from professors who doubted a kid from the wrong side of Detroit could understand advanced physics, to NASA's administrators who questioned whether someone who looked like him belonged in mission-critical positions. "I understand your concern about the vehicle," Marcus replied with the same calm tone he'd used when briefing astronauts before launch. "What specific issues are you experiencing?" Sterling laughed, a sharp, dismissive sound that echoed through the service bay. "The engine's making a noise that 3 different Ferrari-certified technicians couldn't diagnose. I drove it to the dealer in Beverly Hills, then to 2 independent specialists. Nobody can figure it out. I need someone who actually understands complex automotive engineering, not someone who changes oil and rotates tires." Marcus nodded politely, his expression unchanged. What Sterling couldn't know was that the man he was dismissing had spent 3 decades designing and troubleshooting propulsion systems infinitely more complex than anything Ferrari had ever produced. The same hands Sterling was looking at with disdain had fine-tuned engines that had carried American technology to Mars, had solved problems that stumped teams of MIT graduates, had made calculations that had to be perfect because failure meant the loss of billion-dollar missions. "Well, since I'm here," Marcus said mildly, "why don't I take a quick listen? Sometimes a fresh perspective helps." Sterling waved him away with obvious annoyance. "Fine. Waste your time if you want. But when you can't figure it out, and you won't, get me someone with actual credentials." Marcus popped the hood and immediately felt the familiar rush of encountering a new mechanical challenge. The Ferrari's twin-turbocharged V8 was undeniably beautiful, a masterpiece of automotive engineering with its precisely machined components and elegant design. But to Marcus, it was just another machine with a problem to solve, no different from the rocket engines he'd spent his career perfecting. He listened to the engine idle for exactly 30 seconds, his trained ear immediately identifying the subtle irregularities that had stumped 3 supposedly expert technicians. The sound was actually familiar to him, not from automotive work but from the countless hours he'd spent in NASA's test facilities, fine-tuning rocket propulsion systems where the margin for error was zero. The rhythmic inconsistency he was hearing suggested a timing issue, most likely in the variable valve timing system. It was the kind of problem that required understanding not just how the system was supposed to work, but how it interacted with every other component in the engine. "It's your VVT system," Marcus announced after just 2 minutes of listening, his voice carrying the quiet confidence of absolute certainty. Sterling stopped his phone conversation mid-sentence, turning to stare at Marcus with surprise. "What did you just—" "Variable valve timing," Marcus explained patiently, already reaching for his tools. "Specifically, the cam phaser on the intake side isn't advancing properly at higher RPMs. You're getting inconsistent oil pressure to the solenoid, probably due to a partial blockage in the oil control valve." Sterling's mouth fell open slightly. How could you possibly know that just from listening to the engine for 2 minutes? Marcus smiled as he began systematically removing the engine cover, his movements precise and methodical. "Same way you diagnose any precision system failure, Mr. Sterling. You identify the symptoms, isolate the variables, analyze the relationships between components, and trace the problem to its source." As Marcus worked, Sterling found himself inexplicably drawn to watch. There was something different about how this mechanic moved, a confidence and precision that seemed almost surgical. Every motion was deliberate, every tool selected with purpose. It reminded Sterling of something, though he couldn't quite place. "You seem remarkably comfortable working on these high-end engines," Sterling observed, his previous dismissiveness giving way to genuine curiosity. "Most mechanics are intimidated by Ferrari's engineering." "I've had some experience with complex mechanical systems," Marcus replied diplomatically, carefully removing the VVT solenoid to examine it. Just as he'd predicted, oil residue had created a partial blockage that was throwing off the entire timing sequence. It was a relatively simple fix, but one that required understanding the system's architecture well enough to diagnose it correctly. Sterling leaned in closer, watching as Marcus cleaned and recalibrated the component with the kind of methodical precision typically reserved for Swiss watchmakers. "Where exactly did you learn to work like this? Your technique is unusual." Marcus had learned long ago that people made assumptions based on appearances, and sometimes it was easier to let them believe what they wanted to believe rather than deal with the complications that came with the truth. "Here and there," he said simply. "You pick things up over the year." But Sterling was persistent. "No, this is different. The way you approached the diagnosis, your understanding of the system architecture, this isn't typical automotive training." Marcus continued working without responding, hoping Sterling would lose interest. He'd chosen this job specifically because he wanted to work in anonymity, to solve problems without the weight of his reputation and achievements following him everywhere. The last thing he needed was attention. 25 minutes later, Marcus had the VVT system cleaned, properly calibrated, and reassembled. He'd also performed a complete oil system flush and replaced the filter with a higher quality unit that would prevent similar problems in the future. When he fired up the engine, it purred with perfect smoothness, the irregular noise completely eliminated. Sterling stood transfixed as the Ferrari's V8 settled into a harmonious idle, every cylinder firing in perfect sequence. "How did you— 3 certified Ferrari technicians couldn't figure this out. They had diagnostic computers, factory manuals, direct lines to the engineers in Maranello. How did you solve it in less than half an hour?" Marcus closed the hood and began cleaning his tools with the same methodical care he'd shown while working. Sometimes the most complex problems have simple solutions, Mr. Sterling. Your VVT system just needed proper maintenance and the right oil viscosity. The blockage was preventing optimal performance, but once you cleared it and recalibrated the timing, everything else fell into place. Sterling shook his head in amazement. But how did you know to look there specifically? The other technicians ran comprehensive diagnostics and couldn't isolate the problem. Experience, Marcus said simply. When you've worked on enough precision systems, you start to recognize patterns. Similar problems tend to produce similar symptoms, regardless of the specific application. But then Sterling's phone rang, and Marcus could see from his expression that whoever was calling had something urgent to discuss. Sterling answered with his usual brusque efficiency, but within seconds his entire demeanor changed. Richard Sterling. What? James, slow down. Are you absolutely certain about this? Sterling's face went pale as he listened to whoever was on the other end. You're telling me that Dr. Marcus Thompson, the propulsion engineer from NASA, is working as a mechanic at my dealership? That's impossible. I just watched him fix my Ferrari. But he can't be. Are you sure it's the same person? Marcus felt his stomach drop. He'd hoped to keep his past life buried, to enjoy the simple satisfaction of working with his hands without the complications that came with his reputation. But apparently, someone had recognized him. Sterling's conversation continued, his voice growing more incredulous with each sentence. The man who designed the propulsion systems for the Mars rover mission, the same Marcus Thompson, who revolutionized rocket engine efficiency and won the National Medal of Technology. You're certain he's working in my garage? Marcus continued cleaning his tools, hoping against hope that this was somehow a case of mistaken identity. But he could feel Sterling's eyes on him, studying his face with new intensity. Sterling hung up the phone and stared at Marcus with an expression of complete disbelief. That was my business partner, James. He's been trying to hire a consultant for our aerospace division, and he's had Dr. Marcus Thompson at the top of his list for 6 months. He said you're the Marcus Thompson who spent 30 years at NASA, who designed some of the most advanced rocket propulsion systems ever built. The service bay fell silent except for the gentle hum of the perfectly tuned Ferrari engine. Marcus could feel the weight of the moment, the inevitable collision between the life he'd left behind and the simple existence he'd been trying to build. Marcus straightened up slowly, meeting Sterling's gaze with the same calm dignity he'd maintained throughout their interaction. Now I fix cars. But why? Sterling's voice cracked with genuine confusion. You could be making millions consulting for aerospace companies. You designed the engines that got our rovers to Mars, that supply the International Space Station. You could write your own ticket anywhere in the industry. Why are you working in a garage? Marcus set down his tools and leaned against the workbench, considering how much truth to share. Miss Sterling, have you ever spent 30 years of your life working on projects where a single mistake could doom an entire mission, where every decision you make is scrutinized by committees, where politics matter more than physics, where you spend more time in meetings justifying your work than actually doing it? Sterling remained silent, clearly struggling to process this revelation. I got tired of it, Marcus continued. I got tired of having to prove my worth to people who couldn't understand my work well enough to evaluate it properly. I got tired of being the only person who looked like me in rooms full of decision-makers. I got tired of fighting battles that had nothing to do with engineering and everything to do with politics and prejudice. Marcus gestured around the garage. Here, problems are simple. Something's broken, and you fix it. The engine doesn't care about your skin color or where you went to school or who your father was. It either runs properly, or it doesn't. The physics is pure. The satisfaction is immediate. And when some wealthy businessman assumes I'm too stupid to understand complex engineering, well, he smiled slightly. Sometimes the universe has a sense of humor about these things. Sterling looked at the Ferrari, then back at Marcus, his entire worldview undergoing a fundamental shift. I owe you an enormous apology. I made assumptions about you based on your appearance, your job, the color of your skin. I thought because you work with your hands in a garage, you couldn't possibly understand sophisticated engineering principles. Miss Sterling, Marcus said quietly, I've spent my entire career proving that intelligence doesn't come with a dress code or a particular skin tone. The same principles of physics that got American astronauts to the International Space Station just fixed your Ferrari. Whether you're calculating thrust vectors for a Mars mission or diagnosing a VVT problem, it's all about understanding how systems work and having the patience to find the real source of the problem. Sterling pulled out his phone again, his hands slightly unsteady as he dialed. Jennifer, it's Richard. Cancel all my appointments for the rest of the day. I need you to prepare a consulting contract immediately. Yes, the Marcus Thompson, the NASA engineer. He's standing right here in our service bay, and I just watched him solve an automotive problem that stumped 3 Ferrari-certified technicians. He looked at Marcus with newfound respect and more than a little desperation. Thompson, I know you said you're happy working here, but would you consider consulting for Sterling Industries, even just occasionally? We're developing next-generation propulsion systems, hybrid rocket electric engines for high-performance vehicles. We're trying to bridge aerospace technology with automotive applications, and frankly, we're struggling without someone who truly understands both fields. Marcus felt a familiar spark of interest, the same intellectual curiosity that had driven him through 3 decades of pushing the boundaries of what was possible. What kind of propulsion systems are you talking about, specifically? Sterling's eyes lit up as he sensed an opening. We're working on hybrid systems that combine traditional internal combustion with electric motors and small-scale rocket boosters for extreme performance applications. Think Formula One meets SpaceX. The theoretical performance gains are enormous, but we're having trouble with the integration challenges. For the first time that afternoon, Marcus's eyes showed genuine excitement. Integration challenges? How? Are you talking about power delivery coordination, thermal management, or fuel system compatibility? All of those and more, Sterling admitted. Our current team understands automotive engineering and they understand electric systems, but the rocket propulsion component is beyond their expertise. We need someone who can think across all 3 domains simultaneously. Marcus found himself drawn into the technical discussion despite his reservations. What kind of thrust levels are you targeting? And what's your fuel preference? Liquid oxygen and methane like SpaceX? Or are you considering solid fuel systems for simplicity? We're actually exploring hybrid solid-liquid systems for safety reasons, Sterling explained, his business persona giving way to genuine technical enthusiasm. But we can't seem to get the combustion efficiency high enough to make the weight penalty worthwhile. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. Hybrid systems are tricky, because you're essentially trying to optimize 3 different propulsion methods simultaneously, each with its own performance characteristics and thermal requirements. The key is usually in the control systems, making sure all 3 components work together rather than fighting each other. Sterling extended his hand, this time with genuine humility and respect. Dr. Thompson, would you consider working with us? I promise anyone who joins this project will know exactly who they're working with from day one. No more assumptions, no more prejudice, just brilliant minds solving complex problems. Marcus studied Sterling's face, looking for signs of the condescension and prejudice he'd encountered earlier. Instead, he saw something he hadn't expected, genuine remorse and a sincere desire to make amends. Just call me Marcus, he said finally, shaking Sterling's hand. And Mr. Sterling, the next time you meet someone doing honest work with their hands, remember that you might be talking to the person who helped humanity reach for the stars. Intelligence and wisdom come in all forms, and often the people you least expect to surprise you are the ones who end up changing your life. As they shook hands, Marcus noticed that other employees had gathered around the edges of the service bay, drawn by the unusual scene of their wealthy boss treating a mechanic with obvious deference and respect. Marcus, Sterling said as he prepared to get into his perfectly running Ferrari, what do I owe you for the repair work? Marcus smiled, the same humble expression he'd worn when accepting the National Medal of Technology from the president. Consider it a professional courtesy between engineers. But the next time you bring a vehicle here, maybe start by asking about the technician's qualifications before you decide what they're capable of understanding. Sterling nodded, his face reddening with embarrassment and admiration. I guarantee you, I'll never make that mistake again. In fact, I'm going to make sure everyone in my organization understands that competence and intelligence aren't determined by appearance or assumptions. As the Ferrari disappeared into the afternoon traffic, Marcus returned to his workbench. His phone was already beginning to buzz with calls from aerospace companies who had somehow learned that he was available for consulting work again. Word traveled fast in the industry, and his reputation had only grown during his brief retirement. But for now, he was content to finish his shift, to complete the routine maintenance on the other vehicles in the bay, and to reflect on how one afternoon had reminded him that even the most unexpected encounters could lead to interesting possibilities. The other mechanics had gathered around his workstation, their faces full of questions and newfound respect. "Marcus," said Tommy, the youngest mechanic on the crew, "why didn't you ever tell us who you were? I mean, you designed rocket engines. That's incredible." Marcus picked up another diagnostic scanner, ready to tackle whatever challenge came next. "Because, Tommy, it doesn't matter who you used to be or what you've accomplished in the past. What matters is who you choose to be today and how you treat the people around you. Every person deserves respect for the work they do and the knowledge they bring, regardless of what uniform they wear or what assumptions others might make about them." He looked around at his colleagues, men and women who had accepted him as an equal from his first day, who had never questioned his competence or his right to be there. "Besides," he added with a smile, "I've learned more about practical problem-solving working alongside all of you than I did in 30 years of corporate meetings and academic conferences." As the afternoon shift continued, word spread throughout Sterling Automotive about the revelation in Bay 3. The quiet, respectful mechanic who had been working among them for months was actually one of the most accomplished aerospace engineers in the country, a man whose work had literally helped expand the boundaries of human exploration. But more importantly, everyone who had witnessed the interaction between Marcus and Richard Sterling understood that they had seen something significant, a demonstration that intelligence, competence, and wisdom exist everywhere, often in the most unexpected places, and that the worst mistake anyone can make is to judge others based on superficial assumptions. The lesson resonated far beyond that service bay, rippling outward as Sterling shared the story with his business associate, as the other mechanics told their families about working alongside greatness without even knowing it, and as Marcus himself prepared to re-enter a world where his expertise was desperately needed but his humanity had too often been overlooked. In the end, it wasn't just Sterling's Ferrari that got fixed that afternoon. It was a reminder that respect, competence, and brilliance come in all forms, and that the people we underestimate today might just be the heroes we need tomorrow.